Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue my series on adapting the fighting fantasy rules to a Twine game using the Sword and Planet subgenre of science fiction to inspire the setting and plot. In particular, I would like to talk about the name of one of my alien species. In the game so far, there are 3 species living on the planet which the player character is sent to. One of them is humans, and there's a sort of a basically hostile species that I haven't done anything about. We haven't sort of met them yet. And there is a species of gorilla-like creatures who might be friendly or might be hostile, and among whom the player character might live for several sections of the game. And this last species is the one that I was just calling them the aliens or the hunter-gatherers, but I've now given them a name. And that name is Eoya, so that's EO-YA. And I'd like to talk about why or how I chose that name. I didn't consciously sit down and sort of work it out. I just tried out sounds in my head, I guess, until I came up with one that sounded right. But I've sort of thought about retrospectively where I got the idea for that name, why that name sounded right to me, and I think it's might be worth sharing. There's 2 immediate inspirations for it. One is a character called Cromya, so CROM-YA, who appears in a H.P. Lovecraft story. He is meant to be a sort of reference to Conan, the Robert E. Howard character. Lovecraft was pen friends with Robert E. Howard, and he often put little references to other writers that he knew and their creations in his stories, as well as encouraging other people to use his ideas in their stories. And so Cromya is a sort of reference to Conan, Crom being the god of the Cimmerians, which is the imaginary group of people that Conan comes from. The other inspiration is the Vrilya, VRIL-YA. These are an alien species living under the earth in a Victorian science fiction novel called The Coming Race, written by the same writer who wrote It Was a Dark and Stormy Night. The Vrilya are called that because their society is based on this fictional sort of mental energy called vril, the name of which was probably taken from the word virile or virility, even though in the story itself it's their name, it's an alien name, and they don't speak English or know about the languages of the surface world or anything. So it doesn't make a lot of sense why their name for energy should be evocative of an English language word which has a very similar meaning. And that's a practice which I dislike. I didn't want to have a name for the species that was like the Latin name for gorillas or something. These aliens are sort of like gorillas, if I didn't say that before. That always trips me up when I come across it. Like, why does this dragon-like race, why are they called the Draconians or something? It's okay if that's the name that humans gave to the species, but if it's not stated where the name comes from, and if it's implicitly the species' own name for itself, that it always seems odd to me. So I didn't want a name that was based on any English language word, because I wanted the name to be their own name for themselves. It's what they call themselves. But I actually feel that I might have fallen into another trope that I also don't like. Without thinking about it, I only thought of this today, and that is the trope that technologically simple people have short names. So if I tell you about there's a group of aliens, and two of them are named Grog and Ugg. You probably don't think of a technologically advanced species. You're probably thinking of sort of a species that are like so-called cavemen, right? Perhaps orcs would have names like that in a lot of settings. And I don't like that trope for a number of reasons, not least that the language of hunter-gatherers is not simple. It's not simpler than our language. Their technology is less effective, more primitive. Perhaps you could say simpler in some ways, although it's probably not simpler to learn. I would imagine that learning to hunt is not necessarily easier than learning to program a computer or something, but it is simpler in at least one sense. But their language is not simpler. It doesn't mean that the words they use are shorter. For example, in my home country of Australia, the Aboriginal people were living as hunter-gatherers, some of them into the 20th century, and their Aboriginal words can be really quite long. So that trope doesn't make sense. But now that I think about it, I feel like I might have fallen into it. I don't know whether I'll reconsider the name. I'll probably come back to that if I have time. But yeah, I don't sort of like the idea of short meaning primitive, like short words meaning primitive, because it just doesn't accord with reality at all. I want to end by briefly talking about invented languages in Sword and Planet. Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom series, I don't know if it was the first series to have extensive sort of made-up words, but it certainly would have popularised that practice. He didn't invent a language. He never talks about the grammatical rules of the Martian language. There's a single language for the whole planet. But he does use a lot of words. He likes using a lot of words for flavour, particularly words to do with armies and fighting, words for mercenaries and princes and commanders and stuff like that. We are probably used to Tolkien. We sort of probably read Tolkien and people who were influenced by Tolkien, and to some extent were trying to create similar effects to Tolkien. And so we find invented languages kind of probably quite normal and natural. Sword and Planet very seldom does that, in my experience. They generally tend to follow Barsoom, where they have a few words for flavour, but they don't tell you how the language works, even on a really basic level, like do Martian sentences put the subject or the object or the action first? Well, we don't know. He never talks about that, and that's a practice that I wanted to follow. Just have some words for flavour, but don't have a complete language. What I've done to make it seem a bit more like a true language is that the gorilla-like aliens are called the Eoya, and then the humans and the sort of insect-like aliens, they're also called the something-ya. So, although it's never stated, the implication is that ya means sort of species or people or group or something like that, and also that it always appears at the end of a phrase. So it's you might say the insect species or the gorilla species or the green species or whatever it is that the first word means. As I say, I might revisit the names later, but I suspect that I'll probably, at the moment, I'm interested in other things, not least sort of finishing at least a first draft of the overall game. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.